Wow, interesting offices, very Silicon Valley.
For New York.
Absolutely. I love this city. And
You can see the Empire State Building.
there you go. I'm not
We
going
actually
to
get our internet through the Empire. We get it
From the
WiMAX.
Empire State Building.
So you have a WiMAX connection?
Yeah.
Tower Stream?
Yeah, right there, yeah. It's right
There
outside.
you go. I love those guys. I wrote about them once.
It's very cool.
So let's talk about Hunch. Caterina, one of the things which I was interested in knowing is that when you started Flickr, you were about a few years too early, when it came to Web 2.0 and all the social media and everything else was concerned. So from that perspective, is Hunch one of those kind of breakthrough, startups which is ahead of its time?
I think that what Flickr did, and one of the advantages that Flickr had was that there were a lot of things converging at the same time. So Flickr, we started Flickr in 2004, and at the time, broadband had just been introduced into more than 50% of U.S. households. Digital cameras had suddenly started having camera phones on them. I think that was the first year, like 2003 was the first year that more than half of all camera phones shipped had digital cameras. There's all these like convergences. There's also this sort of psychological evolution of the web where blogging and kind of putting things online was no longer a weird solitary activity. Friendster had done everybody a big favor by introducing social networks, and all of these kinds of things were converging at the same time. And I think we're at a similar convergence with Hunch, and Hunch is benefiting from a bunch of different things that are also happening around the same time. And so some of those things include, now that Friendster and MySpace and Facebook and other social networks have been out for a sufficient amount of time, Wikipedia has also grown, to the extent that Wikipedia has, in 2009. People are familiar now with a couple of things. They're familiar with putting social information online. I don't know how many people did that, 25 things that you didn't know about me thing on Facebook, but having these sorts of kind of social interactions, things are kind of like fun. You're telling software, something about yourself is something that people have become increasingly comfortable with, and it's at a similar point of evolution that blogging was circa 2004. Similarly, collective knowledge systems such as Wikipedia have kind of like gained respectability in many circles. I wouldn't say that Wikipedia is kind of canonical, but I think that people now understand the way collective knowledge sites are built, and user contributed content can actually be legit. So these are kind of like some of the things that are coming together, and there's also been an evolution in a great efflorescence, I guess you would say, of answer sites where people are now using the knowledge of other people to ask questions and then capitalizing upon them. And you'll see a lot of answer sites out there. There's Yahoo Answers is an obvious example. Mahalo Answers, Bark is another answer site. So what Hunch is doing is Hunch is actually taking these answer sites, these collective knowledge systems like Wikipedia, and combining them with a decision tree, which is kind of a remarkable thing that hasn't been done yet on any other answer sites, which accretes knowledge over time. So one of the benefits of collective knowledge sites like Wikipedia is that people make small additions to it, and the site gets better over time. It gets smarter over time. It learns things over time. The answer sites don't tend to do that. They tend to be kind of like what we call like a small read-write ratio. You ask a question, and maybe 5 people give you an answer, and then maybe a small number of people benefit from that. But over time, knowledge doesn't accrete on that site.
So Chris, you had started Site Advisor, which was kind of basically advising people on what sites not to visit, right? So how is this fit into your theory of the web, where the web is going? How is this an evolutionary step from that?
Yeah, I think this is pretty different than Site Advisor in the sense that, well, there's a lot of similarities. It's sort of everything we like to do is consumer facing, but also has a sort of a technology angle to it. At least and particularly me and Tom, who started Site Advisor, though, like in the Clay Christensen sense of the word, was not a disruptive innovation. It was sort of an extension to existing security suites, and one that I think, you know, was now, I think people think is kind of obvious, is now in all of the security suites, they all have this feature. Actually, it was a feature that something that bothered me, that it was sort of not disruptive. And when I say it's disruptive, what I mean is, like one of the key, Christensen says this in one of his books, one of the key things about disruptive technologies is that people always think they're a toy at first. And that's what they said. So when I used to work in venture capital, we invested in Series A of Skype, and everyone was saying Skype was a toy, right? And you know, the famous story is the Telegraph, Western Union was saying, oh, the phone's a toy, you know, it only goes a mile, whereas we can go across the sea, you know. But of course, what these people who say things are a toy aren't seeing is that, this is Christensen's sort of famous thesis, right, is that the technology goes like this, whereas the sort of demand for technology doesn't go up. So the demand for sort of decision-making technology is going to be more or less flat, right? People, you want to find out what college to go to, you want to figure out what camera to buy. That's sort of like, you know, people have sort of a set level of need for that. Our technology right now, sometimes, you know, it varies by category. In some cases it's really good, in some cases it feels more like a toy, but over time that's going to go up, and that's what we think about. We think about how, you know, we can build a system such that it's always sort of getting better. And
So
does that make sense? Or?
yeah, it does. So in a sense, you guys are saying that sooner or later, just the way things are going right now, there's too much information, too many things happening on the web, too many inputs. So the traditional paradigm of, you know, search and consume just doesn't work. We need a new kind of a consumption paradigm, right? Like, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that the reason that there's this explosion in answer sites is that it's the natural progression of data to information, right? And information is being organized by search engines, and then from information to knowledge, and the application of human intelligence to that information. And so what these systems are doing is they're applying human. That's why there's all these answer sites out there right now, and there's like so much development in social search, and you know what Facebook is doing, and all of these things applying human inputs and human intelligence to the problem of too much information.
So is there, going forward, like when you look at this thing, you know, there's a lot of talk about Bing calling itself a decision engine. Yeah, maybe. Are we moving towards that future where everything, the information has to be discovered almost with serendipity? Do you think Hunch can become the powering engine for information, personalized information on the web going forward?
Are you talking about distinguishing between, say, discovery versus search? I mean, we were talking just before about an example where, you know, there's some kind of future power application that says, it's your grandfather's birthday tomorrow. There's a set of golf clubs 1 block away from you, and then the Federal Express office and the Hallmark cards offices are, you know, within this, and so you have this little kind of serendipitous, like having to do with your location, your social network, i.e. your grandfather's birthday, and then all of this sort of retail data around.
Right.
Like, you mean, is that what you're kind of talking about?
Yeah, pretty much.
So yes. So I mean, this is kind of. That's kind of a very sci-fi kind of futuristic example, and yet all of those pieces are now available in different forms. They're not coherent and cohesive right now, but
I also think, like if you want to find Abraham Lincoln's birthday, like Google plus Wikipedia is probably about as good an invention as you get for solving that problem. It's, you know, when you want to figure out what college to go to, Google is a very, you know, it's just the very beginning of the process, right? And then you go and do research. And the way we think of it is then you go and maybe you read U.S. News or you read Wikipedia, you do all these other things, and then essentially or maybe you do one of two things. You either call a friend who's an expert, right? And what that expert will probably do if they're a good college counselor, they'll say, well, what do you want to study? And you say, you know,
what's your
physics.
GPA?
What's your GPA? Like they'll ask you follow-up questions, right? And what you're really kind of doing is traversing a decision tree that's in that person's head, right? Alternatively, you might go do research, and what we think of is you're building a decision tree in your head effectively, and then traversing it yourself. You're sort of saying, here are the trade-offs, here's the things, you know. And so the point is, these decision trees are sort of all you know, in people's heads and not in digital form. And there's an incredible amount of sort of redundant cognitive labor that goes on. Why does like when I buy a grill, do I have to become a grill expert, right? Like it's such a silly. I don't want to become an expert in grills. Like I like computers. I like I like phones, like that kind of stuff. I want to be an expert on, but I don't want to be an expert on grills. Like I want to go. And
You want to
have this
be able to
experience,
say,
like,
I want to stainless steel,
I didn't even know what that is. I didn't even know.
$500.
Like, I just, I'm a New Yorker. I just moved to Brooklyn, so now I can get a grill. I didn't even know what questions to ask. Like, like that. Even the great questions to ask is like one of the, I think, useful things about Hunch, right? And I actually used Hunch to buy a grill, by the way. And then, of course, because I work here, I always go and double check and make sure that we're getting good answers, and it gives me the answers most of the time. But you see what I'm saying, like that. And think about like Yahoo Answers. If you go to Yahoo Answers and you say, should I get a Mac or a PC? Right. First of all, you'll probably get a Flame War. But then you also get like the right answer that is not Mac or PC. The right answer is, what are you going to use this thing for? Do you need Exchange support? Right? I mean, it should be a series of follow-up questions. So I think of it as like, ultimately, we're replacing calling a friend and asking him or her their advice. Like we're trying to sort of, I think, replace a very basic human activity and put it online as opposed to going after a search engine.
So is it fair to say that your company is a little bit difficult to understand? You just explained to me very nicely. You're replacing asking a friend, but I mean it is a very complicated topic to explain.
It is and it isn't. So I think that Hunch, if you arrive at
Can I give you
the top of the topic, should we?
I think that Hunch, Wikipedia, before it started showing up in search results, people were like, that's this weird hippie, make your own encyclopedia, right? No one got it. But I think the moment you got it was the day that you typed in Abraham Lincoln and you clicked on this page on Google, and it was this beautifully formatted, simple thing instead of having to go, and there weren't ads and there weren't, right? Isn't that when you got it? And that's when I got it. That's when I sort of clicked for me, right?
Well, I didn't
Yeah, you
search for
suddenly
it.
understood it.
I mean, and like that's when I was like, wow, this thing is, and the thing is, then it shifted, right? Then it wasn't just like some weird hippie commune. Like even if I don't believe in Wikipedia at that point, I now care about it because it's become the authoritative resource. So even if I'm like a philosopher and I couldn't care less about Wikipedia, I'm like, I really care that they represent,
Richard
Gordy in the right way, because once it sort of switches over to the authoritative resource, right? That's sort of how we think about Hunch as being kind of, if we can get to that stage, that's when we sort of, I think it's a gigantic, valuable.
Well, here's the thing. What I would say, describing what Hunch is and all of the technology that goes into it, and all of the thinking, and all of the, kind of convergent trends that are happening that make this a valuable product is very complex. But the experience is actually stupid simple. You don't even need to type. You just click.
So this is her coming in from Google. So this is an actual search result.
So this is an actual search result. So you get to,
Say like best, like
I
right
probably
now,
won't be able to capture that on this tiny camera.
So we typed best laptop for me.
Right.
We recently launched a site, so we don't, our SEO takes time to get sort of broad match, and so obviously our goal at some point is to appear for laptop and best laptop. But someone types in best laptop for me, and Hunch comes up here.
So this is would be a typical kind of approach, and so you get to this page, which is what's the best laptop for me, and then you answer a series of questions.
You don't even type it. You're just clicking.
How much are you willing to spend? $750 up to $1,000, $2,000. So these are questions that are kind of leading you through that decision tree and asking you. So the experience itself is super easy. Like you just kind of click and you answer these questions. Do you prefer lighter weight or heavier?
Yeah, so you have to distinguish between there's this whole sort of theoretical backside to it, right? And then there's the sort of contributor view of the world, which is kind of if you log in today, and that's sort of the analog would be like the contributor view of Wikipedia, and then there's this sort of the end user experience, which we think is actually dead simple, despite all this fancy philosophy.
So tell me, how does the whole back-end technology work on this? Like, what kind of infrastructure do you guys have?
I mean, just like
it's like a database-driven. What's going on in the back-end?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so with sort of a standard web architecture, LAMP stack, Python. I don't know, like is that. But basically, I mean, it's essentially we're a big database, and we have some interesting algorithms. And one of the interesting algorithms is what we call the question selection algorithm, which is basically it has in the laptop category 30 questions, let's say, and it tries to figure out which are the best ones to ask at any point. And you can kind of basically, in a nutshell, there's this measure called info game, but it's basically like, think of it as like there's a whole bunch of choices left. Like, for example, we had one that's like, during the election, we had one that was like, who should I vote for in the primary, for president? And so first it would ask you, do you support the Iraq war? Because it turns out that question split people between Democrats and Republicans the best. And then if you went down the Democrat path, it would say, do you believe in, are you an environmentalist, to sort of separate those two sort of sections of the Democrat, so it's sort of like, think of it as like trying to find the best question to kind of split things.
And over time, the system learns which are the more predictive questions.
That's
and
right.
so it
So
weeds out
promotes and
the
demotes questions.
promotes and demotes questions.
And then the next technology is at the end, like let's say you answer 10 questions about what kind of car you want. It's almost never the case that a single car satisfies all 10 questions, just mathematically. It just doesn't happen, right? If you have 10 questions with 4 answers, you can do the math around enough cars that satify everything.
Right, you want a Macintosh, but
so
you
you
want to
figure
pay
out
less
how to
than
make
$1,000. You're not
Yeah.
gonna get
so
it.
that's figure out how to make trade-offs, and that's another part of how that was a big part of the technology, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, what we do is we learn. So we started. We had a sort of a long, like a lot of R&D processes, sort of a long meandering thing that went down dead ends and other things. And for a while, what we finally figured out was it works much better if we sort of make an explicit separation between kind of the fact that you want to pay $500, the kind of factual question,
Right.
and then your taste. Okay. So I'll give you an example from my personal experience. I actually don't own a car. I'm a New Yorker, but I was thinking about getting a car. So I went to like Edmunds or something, and I was like, I got to get a hybrid, like to satisfy my liberal guilt or whatever. And but I really wanted like an SUV or something, and so so I went through and it told me to get the Lexus hybrid, right? And then I come into the office and I say I'm gonna get the Lexus hybrid, and everyone's like, you can't get a Lexus hybrid.
He would totally lose his Brooklyn.
Then you lose like your fake cool Brooklyn thing, whatever. So it turns out like there's a Toyota has a Highlander for whatever. It's the same car, but it's like I could get it to. So the point
You
I'm
could get
making
away
is
with not.
the point I'm making is like that. So like there's sort of like I want to get a hybrid this, but there's a whole other component which is kind of this taste component, which we think is best modeled through statistical. So what we do is we just ask people tons of questions about themselves and let the statistics figure it out. And that is a very non-trivial, interesting technology. It's similar actually to sort of the Netflix challenge stuff. In fact, one of the winning team members is one of the guys who worked on it with us. But and that sort of like you have to take this giant, I don't know how much you want to detail, but it's like this, it's called matrix reduction. You take this giant sparse matrix of like people saying they're Democrat and people saying they like the Toyota Highlander, and you reduce it into a smaller,
Okay.
But the point is, it's similar to like, these technologies are, I'm not going to say commoditized, but you can go hire, for the basic kind of, your average Stanford PhD and do and do like a quick version and do it pretty right. What ends up happening is that, and this is similar to my last company with the technology, is it's all the little details that take 2 years to figure out. That's like, it's like when someone says yes and or they say no to I like this movie, like how do you handle the no? It actually turns out it's a really non-trivial problem how you handle no's, and like how do you weight things, just like all these things, and like we've done hundreds of experiments and all sorts of other little things to figure it out. So like the basic thing.
But I really think that to kind of condense what Chris is saying is that there's machines can take you only so far.
That's right.
And one of the most important things that you can do is create a product that is able to capture information, is able to kind of get useful information and make useful decisions by human input. So there's a reason why this is a kind of a user-generated collective knowledge system.
So let me ask you this thing. Do you believe that the human-computer interaction will become a key component of the web going forward, given that we have really a data problem right now? We have a problem of plenty on the web right now, and it's only going to increase. Do you think what you guys are doing, or companies like what you are doing, will become like standard practice in most web services?
Absolutely. I mean, I really think that this is Web 3.0, right? Web 3.0 really is taking all of this
This is gonna be
I know.
Okay,
I don't think we should use words like
I'm not going to say that.
No, but it's
However, but I do think that what's happening right now is exactly as you described. There's this great, what with all of the social networks and all of the people uploading photos to Flickr and the videos on YouTube and people answering those 25 things you didn't know about me questions and Yelp reviews, et cetera, there's this like incredibly lush landscape full of data that's not been sorted, and all of this wonderful human added data is just kind of waiting there to be analyzed and sorted by fancy algorithms.
So it's sort of like how the Amazonian jungle is, you just don't know what's in there, right? It's pretty much, that's what the information landscape has become. So let me...
We also think a lot about like the paradox of choice.
Yeah.
From that book, just being sort of overwhelmed with this, I don't want to choose between 1,000 grills or something, right? Like I just want
You just want to know
I just kinda
what
wanna
are
know
the
what
top
is like
three grills.
what is a standard guy like me and who lives where I live and likes the things I like, what would be the obvious grill to buy,
Right. I have two more questions, and then we'll, I want the demo. So the second question the second last question I have for you guys is, now going forward, right, like as we look out into the future, tell me, like, what do you think 5 years from now, what does the landscape of web services look like?
The thing that we described earlier, you're standing on the sidewalk, it's your grandfather's birthday. I mean, all of those things, all of those data sources converging into meaningful sorting mechanisms, things that reduce choice, like we were just saying, things that make your life easier, things that help you make decisions will be the primary uses of all of that beautiful information.
Okay. Last question, Caterina, what book are you reading? Give me 3 books you're reading.
Right now,
Yeah.
I'm reading a book called The Well-Adjusted Child about homeschooling.
Okay.
I am reading a book that is still in Galley's form by Christian Krumlish, who is writing about social media and social networks, which has yet to be published. And let me think of what else. I mean, I'm a very literary type, so I am also reading, this is going to sound pretentious, I apologize if you go home, viewers, Proust.
Okay. Okay, that is pretentious. What about you, Chris?
I'm actually, I majored in philosophy in college, and I was sort of having a little revival of philosophy lately. So I was reading Daniel Dennett, the philosopher.
Yeah.
It's a good hunch topic in which Daniel Dennett book you should read.
There you go. Okay.
And I did all the literature, poetry topics in Hunch. There's a ton that I started. So
Great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for indulging me.
Mm-hmm.